The evening sun painted the sky with a soft orange glow as the little town prepared to rest. Birds were returning to their nests and the quiet hum of life began to fade. In a small house at the edge of town lived a young girl named Elena. She sat by the window watching her father, who sat silently on the porch with his old guitar resting across his knees. His fingers no longer danced on the strings the way they once did. The music that once filled their home had faded into memory. Elena had grown up listening to her father's songs. Before she was even old enough to walk, he used to sing her lullabies that made her laugh and dream. Her mother often joined in, her soft voice blending with his to fill their tiny house with warmth. But things changed years ago when her mother passed away suddenly. Her father, Miguel, had been heartbroken. He stopped singing, stopped smiling, and even stopped talking much. The only sound that remained was the quiet creak of his rocking chair on the porch. Elena loved her father deeply, but she didn't know how to bring back the music that had once lived inside him. Sometimes at night, she would sneak into his room where the old guitar rested. She would carefully pluck the strings, imitating what she remembered from her childhood. The strings were dusty and her fingers were clumsy, but she tried anyway. The sound was never perfect, but it was real and it made her feel close to him. One evening, while cleaning the attic, Elena found an old box filled with sheet music. Some pages were yellow and torn, but one stood out. On the top, written in her father's handwriting, were the words, "Sol de mi vida." She remembered hearing that title before. It was her father's favorite song, the one he wrote for her mother. Elena sat on the floor staring at the notes and the faded ink. Something about it made her heart ache, but also filled her with a strange kind of hope. She took the paper downstairs quietly, afraid her father might see it and get upset. But that night, when everyone was asleep, she sat in her room and began to study the song. The melody was gentle, full of love and sadness at the same time. She practiced slowly, sometimes humming the parts she couldn't play yet. It wasn't easy, and her fingers hurt from pressing the strings too hard, but she didn't give up. The song wasn't just music. It was a story of love, loss, and the life her parents shared. As weeks passed, Elena got better. Her father never noticed at first. He was too lost in his thoughts, spending most of his days watching the horizon. The people in town often spoke kindly about him. They remembered the days when Miguel Rivera was the pride of the town, the man whose songs could make even the toughest heart soften. But now, he was a quiet man, carrying the weight of his memories alone. One afternoon, while Elena was returning from school, she saw posters being put up across town. The annual town festival was coming soon, the biggest event of the year. There would be food, games, lights, and most importantly, a stage for performances. Musicians from nearby villages often came to play. Elena stopped and stared at the poster for a long time. Her heart began to race with an idea so bold it scared her. She would play her father's song at the festival. The thought made her both excited and nervous. She had never performed in front of anyone before. Even singing in class made her shy. But something inside her whispered that this was the only way to reach her father's heart again. Maybe if he heard the song he once loved, he would remember how much music once meant to him. That evening, while helping him prepare dinner, Elena looked at her father. His hands trembled slightly as he cut the bread, his eyes lost somewhere far away. She wanted to tell him about the festival, but she couldn't bring herself to do it yet. Instead, she smiled and asked softly, "Do you ever miss playing, Papa?" He paused for a moment, then gave a small nod without saying a word. It was the first time he had reacted to that question in years. That small moment gave her courage. Later that night, she filled out the registration form for the festival's music performance. Her name looked so small on the paper, but she felt a strange strength as she wrote it. She didn't tell anyone about it. Not her friends, not her teachers, and certainly not her father. It would be a surprise, one that she hoped would bring light back into his eyes. Every night after that, Elena practiced in secret. She would wait until her father went to bed, then quietly take the guitar and sit by the window. The moonlight would spill through the glass, touching her hands as she strummed softly. Sometimes she would stop and close her eyes, imagining her parents dancing together to the tune. Those moments made her smile and cry at the same time. One night, as she was practicing, her father woke up and heard faint music coming from her room. He stood outside her door, listening. His heart tightened when he recognized the melody. It was the song he hadn't heard since the night his wife died. He didn't go inside. He couldn't. The memories were too heavy. But as he walked back to his room, a tear slid down his cheek. For the first time in years, he felt something stir in his chest, a mix of pain and pride. The next morning, Elena noticed her father was quieter than usual. He kept glancing at her but didn't say anything. She wondered if he had found out, but he didn't mention it, and neither did she. She continued practicing every chance she got, making sure each note carried the feeling she wanted him to hear: love, loss, and hope. As the festival day came closer, the whole town began buzzing with excitement. Lights were being hung across the streets and music filled the air once again. Elena walked past the main square, where a large wooden stage was being built. She imagined herself standing there, holding the guitar, looking out at the crowd. Her hands started to shake at the thought, but then she remembered her mother's smile and her father's laughter from the old days. That image gave her courage. The night before the festival, she sat with her father on the porch. The stars were bright, and the cool wind carried the faint sound of laughter from the town center. Her father looked tired but peaceful. Elena hesitated, then asked softly, "Papa, if you could hear one song again, which one would it be?" He looked at her, a faint smile touching his lips for the first time in years. "Your mother's song," he whispered. "But some songs belong to the past." Elena nodded, pretending to agree, but deep down she knew. Tomorrow, that song would belong to the present again. When she went to bed that night, she couldn't sleep. Her heart was racing, her thoughts swirling. She kept imagining the crowd, the lights, and her father's face when he heard the song. She prayed she wouldn't mess up. She knew it wasn't about playing perfectly. It was about playing with her heart. And that she could do. Outside, the night grew still. The moon hung high, shining on the old guitar resting by her bed. It was the same guitar her father had once played with so much love. Now it would carry his story once more, through her hands. As the first light of dawn touched the town, Elena woke up with a quiet determination. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, her eyes tired but steady. Today was the day. She didn't know if she would make her father proud or bring him pain, but she knew she had to try. For her mother, for him, for the music that had always lived between them, waiting to be heard again. The morning of the festival arrived with bright sunshine and the smell of freshly baked bread drifting through the streets. The whole town was alive with excitement. Stalls lined the main square, and colorful ribbons hung between the trees. Musicians tuned their instruments, children laughed, and the sound of drums echoed through the hills. For everyone else, it was a day of celebration, but for Elena, it was the day her heart would be tested. She woke early, barely having slept. Her hands trembled as she packed her guitar into its worn brown case. The same guitar her father once played, the one that still carried his fingerprints faintly pressed into the wood. She ran her fingers over it softly before closing the lid. Her father was still asleep when she stepped outside. She wanted to tell him where she was going, but decided to keep it a surprise. She hoped when he heard the music he would come. The town square was already busy when she arrived. The stage stood tall, decorated with flowers and banners that fluttered in the breeze. Musicians moved around nervously, each one waiting for their turn. Elena stood near the back, clutching her guitar tightly, her heart pounding. She could feel sweat forming on her palms. For a moment, she thought about running away. She could easily disappear into the crowd and no one would notice. But then she remembered her father's quiet face, the way his eyes used to light up when he played. That memory gave her strength. The host began calling names one by one. Singers performed cheerful folk songs and the crowd clapped along. A young boy played a lively tune on his violin, earning loud cheers. Elena smiled nervously, trying to focus on the music around her. She kept whispering to herself, "You can do this. Just one song, for him." Back at home, her father woke up to the sound of laughter outside. He rubbed his eyes and walked to the porch. The town was buzzing with life, but his house felt still and lonely. He noticed Elena's guitar case was gone. He thought maybe she had gone to visit friends, but something about the empty chair beside the window made him uneasy. He sat down, the quiet pressing against him. Then he heard faint music from far away, the sound of the festival. For the first time in years, he wished he were there. Meanwhile, Elena waited near the side of the stage as the performer before her finished. Her name was next. The host smiled kindly and called out, Our next performer is Elena Rivera. The crowd clapped politely, most of them not knowing who she was. She walked slowly to the center of the stage, the sunlight catching her hair, the guitar hanging from her shoulder. She adjusted the microphone with shaking hands and looked out at the sea of faces. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The host whispered softly, "Take your time." She nodded, took a deep breath, and then spoke into the microphone, her voice barely above a whisper. "This song is called Sol de mi vida. It was written by someone who taught me that music can heal even the deepest pain." The crowd went quiet. Some people exchanged glances, recognizing the name of the song. Everyone in town remembered it. The song Miguel Rivera wrote for his wife many years ago. No one had heard it since Elena began to play. The first notes were soft, almost trembling, like a secret being told. Her fingers moved carefully but with emotion. The melody filled the air, slow and haunting, carrying across the square. Conversation stopped. Vendors paused in mid-sentence. Even the children grew still. It was as if the entire town was holding its breath. At home, Miguel froze when he heard the distant sound. It was faint, carried on the wind, but unmistakable. His song. His hand started to shake. Without thinking, he grabbed his cane and stood up. The road to the square wasn't far, but each step felt heavy, as though the years of silence were pressing down on him. Yet he walked, slowly but with determination, following the sound that was calling him back to life. On stage, Elena's voice began to rise. It was soft but filled with emotion, the kind that comes from remembering something you've lost but never stopped loving. Her eyes glistened with tears as she sang the words her father once wrote for her mother. The lyrics spoke of sunlight and love that never fades, of promises that time can't break. People in the crowd wiped their eyes quietly, moved by the tenderness in her voice. Elena didn't notice the crowd anymore. In her mind, she was a little girl again, sitting beside her father while he played. She remembered his laughter, her mother humming along, and the warmth of those evenings when music made everything feel whole. She played each note with her heart, her fingers no longer trembling but flowing freely, as if the music had been waiting for this moment all along. As she reached the final verse, a small commotion stirred near the back of the crowd. People turned to look as an older man, thin and gray-haired, slowly made his way forward. Some recognized him immediately and whispered to each other. It was Miguel Rivera. He walked carefully, leaning on his cane, his eyes locked on the stage. When Elena saw him, her breath caught. She almost stopped playing, but something inside told her to keep going. The moment their eyes met, time seemed to stand still. For years, he had avoided this song because it reminded him of everything he lost. But now, hearing it from his daughter, it didn't feel like pain anymore. It felt like coming home. As the last note faded, silence filled the square. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then, all at once, the crowd erupted into applause. People stood, clapping and cheering, their faces shining with emotion. Elena stood frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked out into the crowd and saw her father standing at the front, his eyes filled with tears. Slowly, he began to clap too. Elena stepped down from the stage, her heart pounding. The crowd parted as her father walked toward her. He stopped in front of her, his voice trembling. "That song," he whispered, his eyes glistening. "You remembered it?" She nodded, unable to speak. "I wanted you to hear it again," she finally said softly. "I thought maybe it would bring you back." Her father smiled weakly and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't bring me back," he said, his voice cracking. "You carried me forward." Then, to her surprise, he took the guitar from her hands and strummed the strings gently. The sound was rough, his fingers out of practice, but the melody was still there. He nodded at her to join him. Together, they began to play. The crowd went silent again, watching father and daughter share a song that belonged to both past and present. The sun began to set behind them, casting a golden glow across the stage. For the first time in years, Miguel's eyes were alive again, filled with pride and peace. And for Elena, it was the moment she had always dreamed of, the day she gave her father back his music. When the song ended, the applause was deafening. People were crying and smiling, and some even shouted their names with love and admiration. But Elena didn't hear any of it. She turned to her father, who looked at her with eyes full of gratitude. "Your mother would have been proud," he whispered. That night, as they walked home together under the soft glow of the lanterns, Elena felt lighter than she ever had before. Her father hummed quietly beside her, and for the first time in a long while the silence between them was not empty. It was full of understanding and love. When they reached home, he placed the guitar gently by the window and said, "Tomorrow we'll play again." Elena smiled, her heart full. The music that had once been lost had finally returned, not just to their home, but to their hearts and somewhere deep in the night. The town was still humming with the memory of that song, the song that made everyone stop and listen. The next morning, the sun rose softly over the hills, painting the sky with gentle shades of pink and gold. Birds sang on the rooftops, and the streets of the little town still carried the memory of the previous night's magic. People were already talking about the girl who brought music back to life. Some called it the most beautiful performance they had ever seen. Others said they could still hear the melody echoing in their minds. But for Elena and her father, it was not just a song. It was the beginning of something new. Elena woke to the sound of her father tuning the guitar in the living room. She rubbed her eyes, almost thinking she was dreaming. For so long, the sound of that guitar had been silent, but now it was real again, the gentle hum of strings filling their small home with warmth. She walked out quietly and stood by the doorway watching him. His back was slightly bent, his hands a little unsteady, but his face was calm. When he noticed her, he smiled in a way she hadn't seen in years. "Morning," he said softly. "The strings are a little rusty, but they still remember the song." Elena laughed and sat beside him. "Maybe they were just waiting for you to wake them up again." He looked at her and nodded slowly. "Maybe they were waiting for you." His voice cracked slightly, but his eyes shone with pride. They spent the morning playing together, sometimes stopping to talk about old times, sometimes just listening to the music fill the air. For the first time, Elena felt like the walls of their home were breathing again. It wasn't perfect. Her father still carried pain in his heart, but now there was light breaking through it. Later that day, as they walked through the town, people smiled and greeted them. Some stopped to thank Elena for her performance. "You reminded us what real music sounds like," one old man said with tears in his eyes. Children ran past humming the song, and even the shopkeepers seemed lighter. It felt as though the whole town had woken up from a long sleep. Elena felt shy but happy. She never imagined her performance would touch so many hearts. But what meant the most to her was how her father walked beside her again, head high, greeting people with warmth. For years he had walked with his eyes on the ground, avoiding attention. Now he seemed to belong to the world again. That evening they sat together on the porch. The air was cool and fireflies danced around them. Her father handed her the guitar and said, "Play something." Elena hesitated. "What should I play?" "Anything," he replied, "as long as it comes from here." He pointed to his chest, so she began to play, not the song from the festival, but something new. Something soft and simple, built from the quiet moments they had shared. He listened with his eyes closed, a faint smile on his face. When she finished, he said, "That's your song." "Not mine, yours," those words stayed with her. She realized then that music wasn't just about repeating old memories. It was about creating new ones. The next few weeks were peaceful. Every morning, Elena helped her father with his small garden, and in the evenings they played music together. Sometimes neighbors would stop by to listen. It became a small ritual. People sitting on the fence, children sitting cross-legged on the ground, listening to the sound of father and daughter playing under the fading light. There was laughter, clapping, and sometimes quiet tears. The little house at the edge of town became alive again. One afternoon, the town mayor came to visit. He praised Elena's performance and invited her and her father to play at the upcoming harvest celebration, a much bigger event than the local festival. At first, Elena hesitated. "I'm not sure we're ready for something like that," she said nervously, but her father smiled. "We'll never know until we try." For days they practiced together. Her father was careful and patient, teaching her small techniques he had once mastered. He told her stories about his younger days, how he had traveled from town to town, playing for strangers and finding joy in every note. Elena loved hearing those stories. It felt like discovering a part of him that had been hidden for years. As the days passed, their bond grew stronger. Sometimes they laughed until their sides hurt. Sometimes they sat in silence, just enjoying the comfort of being together. Her father's health was fragile, but his spirit was strong. Elena noticed that whenever he played music, he seemed younger, lighter, as if the weight of sorrow had finally loosened its grip. The day of the harvest celebration came quickly. The town square was filled with decorations, baskets of fruit, lanterns, and colorful fabrics. People from nearby villages had come too, eager to see the father-daughter duo who had touched so many hearts. Elena stood behind the stage holding her guitar, trying to steady her breathing. Her father stood beside her, dressed neatly, his eyes calm but full of emotion. "You nervous?" he asked with a soft chuckle. "Terrified," she admitted. He smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's good. It means it matters to you. Just play from your heart like you always do. Don't worry about the rest." When their names were called, they stepped onto the stage together. The crowd clapped warmly. Elena could see familiar faces smiling up at them, neighbors, friends, and strangers who had come just to hear their music. Her father nodded at her and she began to play. The first notes flowed gently and he joined in soon after. Their melodies blended beautifully, the rhythm natural and effortless. It wasn't about perfection. It was about connection. Between them, between the music, between the people listening. By the time they finished, the audience was completely still, as if caught in the spell of the song. Then came the applause, loud, long, and heartfelt. People stood up, cheering for them both. After the performance, many came forward to thank them. Some said their music reminded them of lost loved ones. Others said it gave them hope. Elena smiled humbly, overwhelmed by the kindness around her. Her father looked proud, his eyes shining as he whispered, "You did it." That night, as they walked home under the stars, Elena felt a deep peace. They didn't speak much, but their silence was full of meaning. When they reached their house, her father sat down on the porch, staring at the sky. "Do you know what I've realized?" he said quietly. "What?" Elena asked, sitting beside him. He smiled faintly. "Music never really leaves us. It just waits for the right heart to play it again." She leaned against his shoulder, the cool night breeze brushing against their faces. "Then I'm glad it waited for us," her father nodded. "Me too." As the days went by, their story spread beyond the town. A local newspaper wrote about their performance, calling it a song that healed hearts. People from other places began visiting just to meet them, some bringing their own instruments, hoping to play along. Their home became a place where anyone could come and share music. It wasn't grand or fancy, just a small porch with a few chairs and a lot of love. Sometimes Elena would catch her father watching her quietly while she played. There was pride in his eyes, but also a quiet sadness. She knew his health was slowly fading, though he never spoke of it. He simply said, "Every song has an ending, but what matters is how it's played." One evening, as they played under the dim glow of a lantern, he stopped mid-song and looked at her. "Promise me something," he said softly. "Anything," she replied. "When I can no longer play, you'll keep the music alive. Don't stop, no matter what." Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded. "I promise." He smiled gently and said, "Good, because music isn't just sound, Elena. It's memory, it's love, it's life itself." That night, as she went to sleep, his words echoed in her heart. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew one thing for sure. The music they shared would never fade. It would live on in her hands, in her heart, and in every person who had ever stopped to listen. The days after the harvest celebration felt like a dream for Elena. People still stopped her on the street to talk about the performance. Some wanted to hear her play again, and others simply thanked her for bringing such warmth to the town. Even strangers who had never spoken to her before now greeted her with smiles. But for Elena, none of that mattered as much as the quiet joy she saw returning to her father's eyes. Every morning she would wake up to the gentle sound of his guitar. The soft strumming filled the house, wrapping around her like sunlight. He looked healthier, his steps lighter. Sometimes he would hum as he made breakfast, something she hadn't heard in years. The darkness that once lived in their home had lifted, replaced by laughter and music. But time has its own rhythm, and even the sweetest melodies must change. Her father's health, though better in spirit, began to weaken again. He hid it well, never complaining, but Elena noticed. His hands shook more often, his breath came shorter, and some days he stayed in bed longer than usual. She pretended not to see it, afraid to face what her heart already knew. One morning she found him sitting on the porch, the guitar resting on his lap. He was staring at the sky with a thoughtful look. "Papa, are you okay?" she asked softly. He smiled gently. "I'm fine, my dear. Just thinking." "About what?" He looked at her, eyes warm but distant, about how fast life plays its song. You think there's still time, but before you know it, the music starts to fade. Elena sat beside him, not sure what to say. She wanted to tell him that the music would never fade, not as long as they had each other. But the words stuck in her throat. He handed her the guitar and said, "Play something for me." She did. The melody floated through the morning air, gentle and full of love. When she finished, he clapped softly and said, "You played better than I ever did." She laughed, shaking her head. "That's not true." "It is," he insisted. "You don't just play notes, Elena, you play feelings. That's what real music is." From that day, she made it her mission to keep him surrounded by music. Even when he felt too tired to play, she would sing for him. Neighbors often came to visit, bringing food or sitting quietly on the porch listening. The house became a place of warmth and comfort for everyone who entered. It was as if her father's spirit had awakened something beautiful in the town. One evening, as the sun set, a man from a nearby city arrived. He introduced himself as a music teacher who had heard about Elena and her father's performances. He wanted to invite them to play at a special charity concert in the city, an event that raised funds for music education for children. Elena was surprised. She had never imagined playing outside her town. Her father listened quietly, then turned to her. "What do you think?" She hesitated. "I don't know. It sounds big. I've never performed for people I don't know." He smiled softly. "Then maybe it's time you do. Music doesn't belong to one place. It belongs to every heart that needs it." After the man left, Elena sat quietly by the window. The idea of performing in front of so many strangers scared her, but she also felt excited. She looked at her father, who was resting in his chair, and realized he wanted her to see the world, to keep the music alive beyond their home. Over the next few weeks, they prepared together. Her father taught her everything he could: how to read the crowd, how to breathe between verses, how to let emotion guide her more than technique. "You don't play a song," he told her. "You live it." As the day of the concert approached, her father grew weaker. He tried to hide it, but Elena noticed how much slower he moved, how he sometimes stopped mid-sentence to catch his breath. One evening, she found him sitting by the window holding the guitar but too tired to play. "Papa," she said softly, "you don't have to come if you're not feeling well." He smiled faintly. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The morning of the concert arrived, and the city was bigger and louder than anything Elena had ever seen. Cars honked, lights flashed, and people hurried in every direction. It made her dizzy, but her father held her hand tightly, guiding her through the noise. When they reached the theater, she looked up in awe. It was grand, with golden doors and bright banners. She had never imagined she would walk into a place like this. Backstage, her hands trembled as she tuned her guitar. She could hear the murmur of the audience on the other side of the curtain, hundreds of people waiting. Her father sat nearby, pale but smiling. "You'll do fine," he said softly. "Just close your eyes and think of home." When the lights dimmed and her name was announced, she stepped onto the stage. The bright lights blinded her for a moment, and she could barely make out the faces in the crowd. She took a deep breath and began to play. The sound of her guitar filled the room, gentle at first, then stronger. Her voice followed, clear and full of emotion. It wasn't just a performance. It was a message, a story of love, loss, and healing. As she sang, she thought of her father, of all the nights they spent playing together, of the lessons he taught her, of his smile when he heard her play for the first time. The song carried everything she couldn't say in words. When she finished, there was silence, and a deep, respectful silence, followed by thunderous applause. People stood, clapping and cheering, their faces filled with emotion. Elena bowed, tears in her eyes. She looked to the side of the stage where her father sat in his chair, clapping weakly but smiling proudly. Their eyes met, and she felt her heart swell with love. After the show, people surrounded them, congratulating her and asking for photos. But Elena's eyes were only on her father. He looked tired, his breathing shallow. She rushed to his side. "Papa, are you okay?" He smiled faintly. "I'm fine. Just proud. So proud." They rode home that night in silence. The stars followed them through the car window, and Elena held his hand tightly. He didn't speak much, just hummed softly, the same melody he used to sing when she was a child. The next morning, Elena woke up early and went to check on him. He was sitting by the window, as always, the guitar resting beside him. The morning light fell softly across his face. He turned to her and smiled. "Did you hear the birds?" he asked. She nodded. "They sound beautiful today." He closed his eyes, listening for a long moment. "Yes," he whispered. "They do." For a while they just sat together, the room filled with peaceful silence. Then he said quietly, "You kept your promise." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "You kept the music alive," he said. "That's all I ever wanted." Tears filled her eyes and she hugged him tightly. "I couldn't have done it without you," he smiled weakly. "That's the beauty of it." "You did." That night the sky was unusually calm. The moon hung low, casting silver light over the quiet town. Elena sat on the porch with her guitar playing softly. The melody drifted through the night air, carrying her heart in every note. Behind her, the house was still. She paused for a moment, looking back at the empty chair by the window, and smiled through her tears. The next morning, the sun rose over the hills just as it always did, bathing the town in golden light. The people who passed by her house heard a soft melody coming from inside, a familiar song played with love. And though one voice was missing, the music was still alive, strong and full of warmth. In every note, her father's memory lived on, not as sorrow, but as a song that would never truly end. The weeks after her father's passing felt like a long, quiet winter for Elena. The house seemed too large, too silent. Every sound reminded her of him. The creak of the porch, the rustle of leaves outside his window, even the way the wind hummed through the trees. She found herself waking up early just to listen, half expecting to hear his soft guitar strumming in the next room, but it never came. She tried to fill the silence with her own music. Every morning she picked up his guitar and played his favorite songs, the ones they used to play together. At first it felt strange. The strings didn't sound the same without his voice beside her. But as the days passed, she started to feel his presence in the notes, not as a shadow, but as something gentle and comforting, like the warmth of the sun through a window. People from the town began to visit often. Some brought flowers, others brought stories about her father, how he used to play for them when times were hard, or how his songs had lifted their spirits. They told her how much joy he had given to others. Elena listened quietly, smiling through her tears. Each story felt like a new piece of him being given back to her. One afternoon, an old friend of her father's stopped by. He carried a worn-out notebook tied with a string. "He wanted you to have this," the man said. "He used to write songs in it. Said one day you'd know what to do with them." Elena opened the notebook carefully. The pages were filled with lyrics written in his familiar handwriting, some finished, some just fragments of ideas. The ink had faded in places, but the words still carried his heart. At the end of the book, she found a small note written just for her. "If you're reading this, it means the music is yours now. Don't let it stay within these walls, share it. Let it live." Elena closed the notebook and held it close to her chest. She could almost hear his voice saying those words. That night she couldn't sleep. The message echoed in her mind. Share it, let it live. She realized he didn't just mean his songs. He meant the love and hope behind them. The next morning she walked into town with her guitar. She stood in the square where she had once performed with him during the harvest celebration. It was quiet at first. A few people stopped to watch as she began to play. The sound of her guitar filled the air, soft and full of emotion. She sang one of her father's unfinished songs, completing the melody in her own way. As the song carried through the streets, more people gathered. Some stood still, some closed their eyes, and some wiped away tears. By the time she finished, the entire square was silent. Then came the applause, loud, heartfelt, and filled with gratitude. An older woman came forward and said, "He would have been so proud of you." Elena smiled, her eyes glistening. "He's still here," she said softly. In every note, that night she made a decision. She would honor his wish, to share the music beyond their little town. She began reaching out to local radio stations, sending recordings of her songs and her father's compositions. To her surprise, people responded with warmth. They said her songs made them feel something real, something they couldn't explain. Listeners from other towns wrote letters, telling her how her music had touched their hearts. Soon she was invited to perform in nearby cities. Each stage she stepped onto reminded her of that first concert with her father. The nerves, the lights, the heavy silence before the first note. But now when she played, she felt stronger. The fear was gone. Her music wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who needed it. One evening after a performance, a young girl approached her with shy eyes and a small voice. "I want to play the guitar like you," the girl said. Elena smiled and knelt beside her. "Then you should. Music is for everyone. You just have to start," the girl grinned. "My dad doesn't like music much." Elena smiled sadly. "Maybe one day he'll hear you play and he'll change his mind. That's what music does. It changes hearts." That night, as Elena returned home, she thought about how much her father had changed hers. His love for music had been more than a hobby. It was a way of keeping life beautiful even when it was painful. And now she was doing the same, carrying his message into the world. Months passed and her songs began to spread far beyond her town. People started to recognize her name. Her performances were filled with emotion, laughter, tears, and moments of pure silence when the audience just listened. But no matter how far she traveled, she always returned home after every tour. The small house by the hill remained her anchor, her reminder of where it all began. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, she found an old tape recorder. Curious, she pressed play. Her father's voice filled the room, rough but warm. He was singing a song she'd never heard before, soft, slow, full of longing. At the end of the recording, he laughed and said, "This one's for my little girl. Maybe she'll finish it someday." Elena sat down and listened to it over and over. The melody was incomplete, but the emotion in his voice was enough to guide her. She picked up her guitar and began to play along. Slowly, she filled in the missing notes and words, letting her heart lead the way. When she finished, she whispered, "We finished it, Papa." That song became the centerpiece of her next concert, a tribute to her father. The event was held in the same city where she had once played beside him. She told the audience the story behind the song, how her father's love for music had shaped her life and how his words continued to guide her. When she began to play, the theater fell silent. Her voice trembled at first but grew stronger with each verse. The song carried both joy and sadness, but it ended with hope, a promise that love never truly fades. When the final note faded, the audience rose to their feet. Many had tears in their eyes. Elena smiled, looking up at the stage lights as if looking toward the sky. "This is for you," she whispered. After the concert, a journalist approached her and said, "Your songs feel like stories. They touch people deeply. What inspires you?" Elena thought for a moment and replied, "My father taught me that music isn't about fame or perfection. It's about connection. It's about reminding people they're not alone." Over the years, Elena continued to write and perform. Her father's old notebook remained by her side wherever she went. It was worn and fragile, but inside it lived his dreams, and hers. She added her own songs to it, filling the empty pages he had left behind. Together, their music became one long story, passed from one heart to another. Every now and then, she still visited the quiet square in her hometown. She'd sit with her guitar and play softly as the wind rustled through the trees. People who passed by would stop and listen, just as they always had. Some recognized her, others didn't. But it didn't matter. She wasn't playing for recognition. She was playing for love, the kind that never leaves even when someone does. As the sun set over the hills, she closed her eyes and smiled. She could almost hear her father's voice beside her, humming along to the tune. The air felt warm and familiar, like the gentle embrace of a memory, and as her fingers moved across the strings, the town seemed to pause again. Just like that first night when she sang his favorite song, and the whole world had stopped to listen. Years passed, and Elena's life became a blend of travel, music, and quiet moments that always led her back home. The small town where everything began still held her heart. The house by the hill, her father's old chair by the window, and the smell of rain on the porch, and they never changed. Even after all her success, she remained the same girl who had once played her father's favorite song to a small crowd that stopped to listen. Her music had taken her to many places. Concert halls, festivals, and even across oceans. People loved her songs not because they were perfect, but because they were honest. Each note carried a story, each lyric carried a memory. She never forgot why she started, or who had given her the gift of music in the first place. But no matter how far she went, there were days when she felt that quiet emptiness again, the kind that only her father's voice could fill. Sometimes, before stepping onto a big stage, she'd whisper softly, "This one's for you, Papa." It became her ritual, her way of keeping him close. One summer evening, Elena returned to her hometown for a short break. The town hadn't changed much, except that more people knew her now. Children waved when she passed by, and older folks smiled proudly, calling her our girl. She loved hearing that. It reminded her that her journey had begun right there, with a single song sung from the heart. She decided to organize a small community concert in the same square where she had once played for her father. The idea was simple. No big stage, no ticket sales, just music for everyone. Word spread quickly. People from nearby towns came with picnic baskets and blankets. Some brought flowers, others brought photos of her father. The air buzzed with warmth and memory. When the evening arrived, the square was full. Lanterns hung from the trees, casting soft golden light over the crowd. Elena stood quietly behind the small stage, holding her guitar close. Her fingers trembled slightly, just as they had years ago. But this time it wasn't from fear, it was from love. She stepped onto the stage to a wave of applause. The sight before her made her heart swell. Families, friends, and neighbors all gathered together, smiling, waiting. "Thank you for being here," she began softly. "This place, this town, and it gave me my first song. And tonight I want to give something back." The first chords rang out through the evening air. She played her father's favorite melody, the same one that had started everything. The moment the song began, the crowd grew silent. Some closed their eyes, others held hands. Even the wind seemed to slow down to listen. Halfway through the song, her voice caught in her throat. She took a deep breath, then smiled and looked up at the sky. "He used to tell me," she said softly into the microphone, "that music doesn't die. It just changes its home." She strummed again, stronger this time, her voice steady and full of feeling. When the last note faded, the audience stayed still for a long moment before erupting into applause. Elena bowed, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. After the concert, people came up to her, sharing how her music had touched their lives. A man said her songs helped him through a loss. A young woman said they gave her courage to follow her dreams. A little boy told her he wanted to learn guitar because of her. Each word felt like a small light, filling her heart with warmth. Later that night, when the square was empty, Elena sat alone on the stage. The lantern still swayed gently in the breeze. She looked out at the quiet space that had once been filled with sound and life. She whispered, "You were right, Papa." The music never stopped. The next morning, as she was packing to leave, she found herself drawn to her father's old guitar, the one she had kept safe all these years. Its wood had darkened with age and a few strings were worn, but it still held the same spirit. She ran her fingers along it gently, feeling the smooth surface. Then she took out the old notebook, the one filled with his songs and her additions. There were only a few blank pages left. She smiled softly and began to write, not a song this time, but a letter. "For whoever finds this notebook," she wrote, "know that music is not just sound. It's memory, it's love, it's life itself. If you ever feel alone, play a note, and you'll never truly be by yourself." She placed the notebook back in the drawer where her father used to keep it. "Maybe one day someone will find it," she murmured, "and the music will start again." Years continued to pass, and Elena's story became one that people told with admiration. Young musicians looked up to her not for her fame, but for her heart. She started a foundation in her father's name, one that provided instruments and music lessons to children who couldn't afford them. "Everyone deserves a chance to find their song," she said whenever people asked why she started it. Every summer, she returned to the town for one special concert, always in the same square, always on the same date. The people called it the Night of the Song. Families came from miles away, sitting under the stars to listen. Some brought candles, others brought their own instruments to join in. It wasn't just a concert anymore. It was a tradition, a celebration of love, memory, and the music that connected them all. One particular year, after the performance, a young girl about 12 years old approached her shyly. She carried a small, battered guitar. "My dad taught me to play," the girl said. "He passed away last year, but I keep practicing every day." Elena's eyes softened. "That's beautiful," she said gently. "Would you like to play something for me?" The girl nodded nervously and began to strum a simple tune. Her fingers stumbled a little, but the melody was sweet. When she finished, Elena clapped softly. "That's wonderful," she said. "Your father would be so proud." The girl looked up at her with watery eyes. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," Elena replied with a smile. "Because I once played for someone who isn't here anymore. But I learned that when we play, they listen, just from a different place." That night, as Elena walked home, her heart felt full. The world kept changing, new faces, new stories, but some things remained the same. Music still had the power to bring people together, to heal wounds, to carry memories forward. When she reached her home, the moonlight spilled through the window, touching the old guitar resting in the corner. She sat beside it and began to play softly. The melody filled the quiet room, blending with the sound of the crickets outside. She closed her eyes, letting the music take her back, to the nights on the porch, to her father's laughter, to the first time she realized that love could live forever through song. And for a moment, she could almost hear him, his voice gentle and proud, humming along. She smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks, and whispered, "I kept the promise, Papa." Outside, the wind carried her melody through the town, drifting past windows and down empty streets. Somewhere a child stirred in bed, hearing the faint sound and smiling in their sleep. Somewhere a couple held hands and listened quietly. Somewhere an old man closed his eyes and remembered a time long ago. The song spread like light, soft, endless, and full of heart. And just as it had all those years ago, the whole town seemed to stop and listen once more.